Welcome to a world without banks, without budgets, and where most people never even touched a gold coin today. We're stepping into the gritty, clever, and surprisingly complex economy of the Middle Ages, where trust was currency, bread was bargaining. Power and everything had a price, even salvation. Before you get comfortable, hit that subscribe button and comment your city name and local time, so we know exactly where in the world you're watching us from. Imagine waking up before dawn in a chilly stone building, the fire barely holding on in the corner hearth. Your bed is little more than a wooden frame stuffed with straw, but it does the job. You rub the sleep from your eyes and reach for your apron, already dusted with flour from yesterday's work. You're a baker in a small medieval town, nothing fancy, but respected. Because bread is everything. It's breakfast, lunch, dinner, and it might also be your rent, your tax payment, or your barter chip for firewood. You pull open the wooden shutters. The sun's not even up yet, but the town is already stirring. You hear the blacksmith's hammer pinging faintly down the alley. The tavern keeper across the way is sweeping out yesterday's grime. A thin trail of smoke curls out of your chimney, promising warmth and food, and more importantly, income. But as you knead your dough and stoke your oven, you're already thinking about something else. How are you going to get paid today? Coins exist, sure. There's the penny, the groat, the farthing, small silver or copper discs stamped with a king's face. But here's the thing, coins are scarce. Most people don't have them. The local peasants who buy your bread don't usually pay with coins. They pay in eggs, onions, firewood, or maybe labor. Sometimes, if they're truly broke, they promise to pay next week. And sometimes you accept that because everyone knows everyone and favors our currency too. Welcome to the reality of barter economics. There's no central supermarket, no receipt printer, no credit card, just a tangled web of relationships and trust. You give a sack of rolls to a shepherd's wife. She promises to send over a wheel of cheese next Tuesday. You give 3 loaves to the cooper fixing your barrels, and in return, he promises not to charge you next time your flour bin needs replacing. Is it organized? Barely. But somehow, it works. Then there's the Riva local official who collects rents and taxes for the Lord. He might stop by your bakery once a month, reminding you how much flour you owe to the manor mill, or how many loaves you're expected to deliver for the feast days. You can't exactly argue. This is feudalism, after all. The land you rent, the oven you use, even the wood you burn, it all belongs to someone else. You're just borrowing it, and in exchange, you pay in bread or grain or your time. So you start your morning routine with a mental ledger in your head. Who owes you what? Who do you owe? You only have so much flour, about 3 sacks left. Your apprentice is still sick, so you'll need to handle the kneading yourself today. You divide the dough into rounds, thinking the abbey will need their usual dozen, and you promised a special batch to the town midwife after she helped deliver your sister's child. Then there's the market. You'll need something left to sell at your stall. But if you take too much, you risk going short tomorrow. And the market, that's another story. It's loud, chaotic, and packed. Merchants selling salted fish from a wheelbarrow, weavers calling out the price of dyed wool, children darting between stalls chasing chickens. Your stall is nothing fancy, a flat wooden table and a stained cloth awning. You line up your loaves round, crusty, fragrant. A merchant walks by and offers to trade a handful of dried apples. You agree. You'll use those in tomorrow's buns. A traveler offers a coin, silver, rare and suspiciously shiny. You take it, but bite it first, just to be sure. Even now, counterfeit coins are a real concern. You've heard of towns where they use tokens instead of real money, bits of carved bone or marked metal chips handed out by local guilds. Some places even use tally sticks, carved pieces of wood split in half, one for the buyer, one for the seller. As long as the notches match, the debt stands. Simple, portable, harder to fake. Some people say it's better than silvered out. Back in your stall, you notice a boy eyeing your loaves. He's barefoot, clutching a turnip and 2 eggs. His mother stands behind him, trying not to look desperate. You know the look. You've been there. You hand over a small loaf and take the eggs. You don't need them, not really, but it's the gesture. People remember generosity. They pay it back when they can. Besides, you're not just a baker. You're part of the social fabric. You feed the town, and in return, the town keeps you alive. Sometimes, someone shows up with actual coins, and that's a blessing and a puzzle. Where did they get it? Did they work a day on the Lord's estate? Did they trade something in the next town over? You don't ask. But once you have a coin, you hold on tight. You'll need it to pay your own dues like the baker's tax at Michaelmas, or the toll to use the King's Road. And let's not forget the miller. He takes a cut of every sack of grain you bring in, and he prefers to be paid in cash at the end of the day. You return to your bakery with an empty basket and a full pouch, not of coins, but of promises. A bundle of firewood, a sack of lentils, a strip of salted meat. Some of it you'll eat, some you'll trade, and some you'll give away to those who helped you in the past. It's not clean, not simple, but it works sort of. You sit down with a crust of your own bread and a bit of weak ale, looking out the window as the town quiets down. You think of tomorrow. The flour is running low. The oven needs patching, but the people will come with eggs and firewood and maybe a coin or two. And you'll do it all over again. Because in the Middle Ages, economics wasn't something people studied. It was something they lived daily, breath by breath, loaf by loaf. Let's take a walk through a medieval market. Not as a baker this time, but just as an observer. You're here to watch, not buy. Listen to the hum of it all. Bartering voices, clinking pots, bleating goats, and the uneven clop of wooden cart. Wheels. It's muddy, loud, and bursting with smells. Fresh herbs, manure, wool, tallow, dried fish, and hot cider. This is where the real economy happens. Not in some castle ledger or royal coin vault, but right here between hands, eyes, and words. Money, as we know it today, barely holds things together. Yes, kings mint coins and lords demand rent, but most of the transactions you'll witness today, they're handled without a single piece of silver changing hands. That's because trust, necessity, and relationships often mattered more than metal. You walk past a shoemaker polishing a dusty pair of boots. A farmer offers him a basket of carrots and a chunk of smoked bacon in exchange for a new pair of saws. There's a bit of grumbling. Carrots aren't what they used to be, but eventually the deal goes through. No coins, no receipts, just a handshake, and maybe a bit of gossip. Barter like this was common, not because people didn't understand money, but because money wasn't useful in the way we think of it today. Coins were precious, yes, but they were also rare and hoarded, used more for taxes, fines, or debt settlement than for everyday purchases. In smaller villages, a coin could go weeks without appearing, and when it did, everyone paused to admire it before passing it on like a relic. And here's where things get even more interesting. Even when coins were used, their value wasn't stable. That silver penny you earned last week, it might not buy you the same tomorrow. Maybe the weight's been clipped. Maybe the Lord has devalued it. Maybe the coin is from another region entirely, say, minted in Flanders, and the local butcher doesn't trust it. So now you're arguing over whose coin is better. Eventually, someone brings out a set of coin scales, and suddenly, this casual bread-for-meat exchange feels more like a courtroom. Now, let's step back and look at value itself. There's no universal price tag hanging over goods in this world. A chicken's worth depends on the season, the weather, the harvest, and who's asking. In a good summer, one chicken might get you a half dozen loaves. In a harsh winter, it might get you 3. And if you're desperate, if your roof is leaking or your child is sick, you might give it away for less, just to get what you need in the moment. This fluidity of value meant that prices weren't just numbers. They were part of a conversation, a negotiation, a social ritual. It wasn't just about the bread. It was about the story behind the bread. Did you grind your own flour? Did you knead it with honey or herbs? Is this your best batch? Are you a widow trying to get by? Or a miller's wife with 3 fields of barley? All of this mattered. In fact, entire reputations were built on fairness. If a merchant was known to overcharge, word would spread. People would walk past his stall. On the flip side, If a butcher occasionally added an extra scrap of meat for the baby, you'd remember that and come back. These weren't just economic choices. They were moral ones. Let's zoom in on one stall in particular, a woman selling dyed cloth. She's worked all winter collecting plants, steeping fibers, and learning just the right amount of alum to bring out the richest blue. Her cloth costs more than plain linen, but it's beautiful, and that matters. A man with a handful of coins approaches, haggles, and then offers 1 silver penny and a promise to send his wife over with a jar of preserved pears. She agrees. The trade is made. But notice, part of the payment is trust. This web of trust was what held the medieval market together. Written contracts were rare outside the cities, and most agreements were verbal, sealed with gestures, tokens, or witnesses. Sometimes even priests were asked to stand nearby, just to hear the deal and make it feel sacred. Now here's the twist. None of this stopped medieval people from dreaming of standardized wealth. Kings and scholars wrote treatises about stable currency systems. Guilds created their own internal pricing guides, trying to regulate how much a pair of shoes or a barrel of ale should cost. But the reality on the ground was always different. Economics was lived with the hands, not written in books. Speaking of books, very few people could read them anyway. Numeracy, the ability to count and calculate, was just as rare. Most merchants kept track of debts using notches on sticks, chalk marks on walls, or knotted ropes. A butcher might have a row of hanging cords, each with a bead or knot representing a customer's unpaid balance. When the debt was paid, the cord was cut. Crude? Maybe. Effective? Always. And yet, despite this wild, improvised system, inflation still existed. Prices rose. Wages were debated. People complained loudly about how expensive things were becoming. In England, there's even a record of bakers being taken to court for shrinking the size of their loaves while keeping the price the same. So much for that being a modern problem. There were even laws, strict ones, about how much a baker or butcher could charge. These were part of what was known as the assize of bread and ale. If you charged too much or watered down your beer, you could be fined or pilloried. Public shaming was the medieval Yelp review. But even with these laws, fairness was more often enforced by the community than the authorities. People remembered. People talked. If a merchant cheated once, he paid for it in reputation for years. And in a world where economic survival depended on long-term relationships, that kind of damage could be worse than any fine by the end of the market day. Most stalls are emptier, baskets carried home full of everything except coins. A brewer carries home a bolt of linen and a jug of honey. A tanner walks away with bread and onions. A carpenter leaves with a promise. The midwife will help his wife in childbirth, and in return, he'll build her a new cupboard come spring. There's a rhythm to it all, an invisible logic. It doesn't always make sense by modern standards, but to the people living it, it worked. Because medieval economics wasn't about getting rich. It was about getting by day after day, season after season. A loaf for a log, a chicken for a chair, a favor for a future, and maybe, just maybe, a penny saved for the taxman. If you really want to understand medieval economics, you have to understand the land, because in this world, everything begins and ends with who owns what patch of earth. And let's be clear, you probably don't own any. You might farm it, you might live on it, but someone else, usually a lord, owns it. It's his name in the records, his seal on the documents, and his men collecting rent if you're late. Imagine for a moment that you're a tenant in a modest village. You've been given a narrow strip of farmland, long and thin, easy to plow with oxen. This land is part of a much larger manor estate, which belongs to a noble who might live miles away or even in another country. You don't see him. You see his steward or reeve, and you owe him not just rent, but a chunk of your life. You pay that rent in several forms. Sometimes it's in kind, a share of your harvest, a pair of chickens, some firewood, or wool from your flock. Sometimes it's labor. You spend 2 days a week working on the Lord's personal lands, known as the domain. You plow his fields, repair his fences, help with his harvest. Your own fields can wait. And then, of course, there are fees. Want to grind your grain? You pay the Lord's miller. Want to bake your bread in the communal oven? That's another charge. Want to get married or pass your land to your son? That'll cost you too. The Lord controls the infrastructure, and nothing is free. But here's where things get even stranger. Technically, even the Lord doesn't own the land, not in the modern sense. His rights come from someone higher up, a baron, a duke, maybe even the king. It's all part of the feudal pyramid, a system where land is loaned downward in exchange for loyalty, military service, and more economic obligations. At the top is the king, who theoretically owns all the land in the realm. Beneath him, powerful nobles receive large estates in return for soldiers, taxes, and unwavering allegiance. These nobles divide their land among vassals, who divide it again and again. By the time it gets to you, the humble peasant, what you're working with is a tiny slice of a giant ancient jigsaw puzzle. It sounds chaotic, and it was. That's why medieval lords kept ledgers, big, hand-copied books written in Latin, listing who owed what, when, and in what form. These weren't just dusty records. They were tools of power. If your name was in the ledger, you were obligated. If it wasn't, you could be evicted, fined, or ignored. One of the most famous of these books is the Doomsday Book, commissioned by William the Conqueror in 1086. It wasn't just a census. It was an economic weapon. It told the king who held what land, how many plows they had, how much tax they owed, and how much more he could squeeze from them. People said it was called the Doomsday Book because, like Judgment Day, there was no appeal. But let's bring it back to the village. Your life as a tenant or a serf is built around seasonal rhythms: planting in spring, harvesting in fall, mending tools in winter. But layered on top of that natural calendar is a financial one: rent due at Martinmas, church tithes at Easter, extra labor during harvest season, and a fee to use the Lord's wine press after grape-picking. What happens if you can't pay? Sometimes your debt is rolled forward. Sometimes you pay with additional labor. Sometimes your livestock is taken. If things get truly bad, you might flee, abandon your land in the night, and seek better terms elsewhere. But that's dangerous. A landless man has no protection, no community, and no rights. You become what they called a masterless man, suspicious, vulnerable, and often hunted. Of course, not everyone in the village is poor. There are always a few freemen who rent land for silver and have more say in local matters. There might be a merchant family who made enough profit selling wool or fish to buy out their obligations. They're still small time, but they're climbing. And above them, the minor nobles, knights, and clergy who manage the estate. And then there's the monastery. Monasteries were economic powerhouses. They owned massive tracts of land, collected rent, operated mills and breweries, and managed complex supply chains. A single abbey might employ hundreds of workers, some lay brothers. Others hired laborers and managed farms, orchards, fisheries, and even schools. They kept records more detailed than many lords, and their scriptoriums produced everything from religious texts to farming manuals. But despite all this complexity, the economy still revolved around something very basic. The land produces food, and food keeps everyone alive. If the harvest fails, the whole system trembles. Prices spike, tithes fall short, rent payments are delayed, hunger spreads. A bad harvest wasn't just a weather event, it was an economic crisis. In response, some lords might offer leniency. Others double down, seizing goods or increasing taxes to make up for shortfalls. The result? Resentment. In the 14th century, this led to revolts, peasants marching with pitchforks, not just against bad harvests, but against the system that turned every natural hardship into human misery. Still, many endured. They adapted. They dug ditches for drainage, rotated crops, raised pigs in the woods, and brewed small ale at home. Self-sufficiency was key. You couldn't count on market prices. You couldn't count on charity. But you could count on your plot of land. If you treated it well and managed your obligations. At the end of the day, you come back to your cottage, sore and muddy. You sit on a stool beside the fire, look at your tools, your boots, your single silver coin, and think, am I ahead? Maybe, maybe not, but your rent's paid, your children ate, and you've still got next season. In the world of medieval economics, that counts as a win. You're no longer a farmer or a baker today. You're a skilled worker, a craftsman, apprenticed at age 12, now grown and wearing your trade like armor. Maybe you're a cobbler, mending worn shoes for townsfolk, or a blacksmith, shaping iron with fire and precision. Or maybe a weaver, your fingers calloused from years of threading wool. Whatever your trade, one thing connects you to others in your position. You're part of a guild, a medieval union, a business club, a protection, racket, and a social safety net, all rolled into one. Guilds were the beating heart of economic life in medieval towns. If you wanted to make, sell, or profit from a product or service, you needed the blessing of the guild. No exceptions. No back alley craftsmanship. Try it, and you might wake up to find your tools smashed or your stall mysteriously burned down. It wasn't just economics, it was order. The guild kept prices steady, quality high, and outsiders out. Let's say you're a candle maker. You didn't just wake up one day and decide to open a stall. First, you spent years as an apprentice, working for food and shelter under the eye of a master. Then, if you were lucky and competent, you became a journeyman paid by the day, moving between towns, building your skill, saving your coins. And if all went well, someday you'd present a masterpiece, a final work judged by the guild council. Pass, and you're in. Fail, and you keep wandering. This system was strict, but it had its benefits. As a master craftsman, you now had access to resources. You could buy beeswax at a discounted guild rate. You were protected from undercutting by cheaper, lesser quality sellers. And if something went wrong, a fire, a robbery, an illness, guild could help you. Sometimes with money, sometimes with labor. Think of it as medieval insurance, minus the paperwork. Guilds also set prices and wages. That might sound controlling, but in a world with no modern regulators or labor boards, it actually prevented chaos. The Guild of Weavers, for example, might dictate that a yard of dyed wool should cost a specific amount, no more, no less. They'd enforce uniformity, same color, same texture, same size. That way, a buyer could trust what they were getting, and members weren't undercutting each other. But let's not romanticize it too much. Guilds were often exclusive, political, and biased. In many places, you couldn't join unless your father was already a member. Women were often excluded, or confined to side roles like brewing or spinning that weren't recognized with the same prestige. And if you were a foreigner, forget it. You could work, maybe, but climb the ladder? Almost never. Now step into a typical guild hall. It's not just a meeting place. It's a symbol of economic power. High ceilings, wooden beams, stained glass. Windows featuring saints of labor. Saint Eligius for metal workers. Saint Crispin for shoemakers. Saint Homobonis for merchants. These were your patrons, your cosmic job references. Guilds didn't just regulate the market, they baptized it. Religion and economics weren't separate in the medieval mind. To cheat a customer wasn't just bad business. It was a sin. You might confess it. You might fear hell for it. Guild rules often reflected this spiritual framework. You couldn't work on certain holy days. You had to donate to the poor. Some guilds even required members to pay for each other's funerals and ensure proper Christian burials. There's something beautifully human about that. Imagine dying, poor and childless, but knowing your guild brothers would carry your coffin, say prayers, and light candles for your soul. Economics wasn't just about life. It extended into death. Still, the guild system had cracks. One was corruption. Some masters used their positions to block promising journeymen from advancing. Others bent rules in their favor. In some towns, wealthier merchants began forming merchant guilds, separating themselves from the more labor-intensive craft guilds. They dealt in wool exports, wine imports, spices, and luxuries, big money. And they had powerful friends. That created a rift. The skilled but modest blacksmith, working tirelessly in his shop, versus the wealthy merchant, trading goods he never touched, dining with mayors and bishops. One lived off his hands, the other off his connections. Sound familiar? In some cities, Florence, Ghent, London, these merchant guilds became the foundation for political power. They didn't just run markets. They ran councils, In Venice, for example, entire families rose to power through their control of trade guilds, shaping laws and economies for generations. It was capitalism, medieval style, but even among the modest guilds, you could still get ahead if your work was good, if your relationships were strong, and if you played the game right. You could build a reputation, a powerful form of currency. A respected cooper could charge more for his barrels. A known goldsmith might be entrusted with church commissions. A skilled tailor could be invited to sew garments for nobility. And if your children were smart, literate, and savvy, they could go even further. Education, while rare, was a way to leap across class boundaries. In many towns, literacy was rising, especially among guild members. Some guilds even maintained their own libraries, stocked with books on geometry, trade routes, Latin prayers, and even basic law. Members used chirographs, split parchment documents, to record long-term contracts. Those who could read and write had an edge. They could document, negotiate, protect, and let's not forget the role of women, especially in urban economies. Though largely excluded from guild leadership, women ran stalls, managed shops, brewed ale, sold cloth, spun wool, and baked bread, often supporting entire households. Widows were especially visible. When a master died, his widow could inherit his workshop, retain clients, and even train apprentices. While the guild may have frowned upon it, economic reality forced acceptance. If a woman could run a business, few questioned it, at least not loudly. But change was coming. By the late Middle Ages, markets were expanding, towns were growing, and new forms of trade were emerging. Double-entry bookkeeping, pioneered in Italy, allowed merchants to track profit and loss with stunning clarity. Banks, though still primitive, were beginning to offer loans and exchange services. The local guild, once the king of the street, now had to share space with something new, capital. And yet, in the back alley of your town, a blacksmith still wipes soot from his brow, a weaver still counts the threads in his loom, and a young apprentice still dreams of presenting his masterpiece to a council of skeptical, aging men. The old system is still alive for now. In the world of medieval guilds, getting ahead meant more than money. It meant craft, community, and a name people remembered, a name worth its weight in silver, even if silver was still hard to come by. You've left the safety of your village and walked a full day on dirt roads, packed hard by hooves and handcarts. The air smells of crushed grass and dust. Your feet ache, but ahead over the hill, you hear it bells clanging, roosters crowing, voices calling out in half a dozen dialects. You've reached the market fair. It's not just any market, it's the biggest one. This side of the river, held 4 times a year and sanctioned by a royal charter. That means safety rights to sell, and most importantly, variety. People have come from miles around to buy, sell, and trade everything from iron nails to goose feathers. There are merchants from London, tanners from York, cloth dealers from Bruges. If you're lucky, you might even spot a Moorish spice merchant or an Italian money changer in a fine wool cloak. This is medieval globalism, muddy, noisy, but very real. The market isn't just a place. It's an event. Flags flutter, church bells toll, town criers shout the day's notices. Children dart between legs, dogs bark at livestock, and stalls are everywhere. Some simple cloths on the ground, others sturdy wooden booths with elaborate signs. There's a man balancing on a barrel, yelling about eel pies. A tooth puller doing mock surgery for the crowd. A woman with a trained squirrel on a leash dancing for coin. And among it all, money finally flows. Real coins, silver pennies, Flemish groats, Byzantine peasants even. You hear them clink into pouches and fall onto scales. Unlike in your home village, where barter is still king, cash rules here, at least for the day. That's part of the fair's magic. It opens a door into a faster, shinier, more transactional world. But let's be honest, it's also overwhelming. Say you're a modest wool trader. You arrive with a cart piled high with rough spun blankets. You've traveled 3 days dodging bandits and axle breaks. You've paid your entry toll at the gate and rented your tiny patch of space 6 feet wide, no roof, right next to a juggler who won't stop singing about cheese. You spread your goods and wait. Your first customer approaches, a well-dressed merchant from another town. He inspects your wool, he asks about the dye, he frowns at your stitching, and then, instead of coins, he offers something unexpected: credit. He writes something on a thin strip of parchment, folds it twice, and presses it into your palm. "Go to that tent over there," he says. "The moneylender will redeem it, or keep it, use it, to buy spices. He'll honor it." You've just encountered a bill of exchange, one of the earliest forms of paper money in Europe. It's not a coin, but it represents coin, and the people at this fair are beginning to trust paper, because carrying bags of silver is dangerous. Paper is light, quick, secure, and for the merchant class, it's the future. So you try it. You take the parchment to a canopy, where an Italian man sits behind a table of ledgers. He glances at the note, sniffs at it, nods, and hands you 10 silver coins. You just completed a medieval bank transaction. No vault, no ID, just a name, a handshake, and a reputation. But that doesn't mean you're safe. Pickpockets are common. So are coin clippers, men who trim tiny slivers. From the edge of each coin, melt them down and pass the shrunken money off as full weight. To guard against this, merchants carry small, balances, portable scales, and carefully weigh every coin, eyeing them suspiciously, like cheese testers at a poly. Bad dairy stall, still business moves fast. By midday you've sold half your wool. In return, you now hold 3 coins, a sealed jar of dried figs, 2 carved combs from a bone worker, and a sack of coarse salt from the coast. You didn't mean to trade for all this, but value here shifts quickly. One moment figs are a luxury, the next they're a bargaining chip. The line between buyer and seller blurs. Everyone is both, and then come the taxes. You notice a man in an official-looking tunic taking notes. He's not shopping, he's watching. He's a toll collector, and he works for the local lord, or sometimes the crown. Every transaction over a certain value is taxable. If you've brought foreign goods, expect another toll. If you're a foreigner yourself, expect yet another. Some call it protection money, others call it robbery with paperwork. Either way, you pay, or you disappear before he finds you again. Even the church has a cut. A priest walks the lanes accepting donations for the upkeep of the shrine. Some merchants give willingly. God might bless their trade. Others slip him coins just to avoid trouble. Religion and economics were never far apart. But for all the noise, the chaos, the mud, this market works. It brings together people who otherwise live in isolated bubbles: townsfolk, villagers, nobles, monks, foreigners. It allows for price comparison, which pressures sellers to improve quality. It creates demand for luxury goods, spices, silks, books that fuel entire trade routes, and it introduces new languages, weights, measures, and habits that slowly ripple back to smaller towns. You hear someone shout about a guild ban a group of butchers, accusing a foreigner of undercutting their prices. The dispute turns heated. The market guards step in rough but effective. Everyone returns to their business. That's the rule: no violence, not here. Fairs are neutral ground. You come for profit, not blood. As the sun starts to lower, the deals wind down. Some merchants pack up, others head to the taverns. Cheap wine, loud stories, backroom deals. A man boasting he sold 3 barrels of French wine for a Flemish tapestry. Another laughing that he traded a single falcon feather for a pair of boots. Exaggerated, probably. But in this place, everything is part of the performance. The richer you seem, the more seriously others take you. That's economic theater. You find yourself in a candlelit tent, trying one last trade. A box of wool combs for a bit of silk trim. This merchant squints at you and nods. Throw in the figs, he says. You hesitate. Those figs were rare, but the silk is rare too. You agree. You walk back to your camp with silk in one hand, a half-eaten fig in the other, and you realize something. This was more than a market. It was practice. For money, for negotiation, for risk. It tested your nerve, measured your word, rewarded your timing. Tomorrow you'll head home. You'll return to the village and talk of the strange coins you saw, the paper notes, the foreign smells. You'll be tired, yes, but also a little wiser, a little bolder, because now you've seen a world beyond your fields. And the next time someone says, "That's not how we do things here," you'll smile and remember the fair where everything was different and everything somehow worked. Let's shift focus again. You've been a baker, a merchant, a tenant farmer. You've traded at a noisy fair, But there's one player in the medieval economy who you haven't really dealt with yet, at least not directly, and that's the church. Not just a building, not just a priest in a robe ringing a bell on Sunday morning. The church in the Middle Ages was a massive economic institution, arguably the richest and most powerful in all of Europe. Kings feared it, lords owed it, peasants depended on it, and whether you believed or doubted or simply endured it, you paid it, because in this world, salvation didn't come cheap. Let's start with the tithe. It's simple in theory. Everyone, regardless of class, owes 1/10 of their annual earnings, harvest, profit, livestock, to the church 10%. It doesn't sound too harsh, especially when you're talking about 3 turnips and a goose. But for many, especially during lean years, the tithe could mean the difference. Between surviving the winter and not, you might deliver your tithe to the local parish priest, who keeps part and passes the rest to his bishop, who in turn funnels resources up to the archbishop and eventually to Rome. It's a chain of hands each, one skimming off a bit. Some of that wealth goes into repairing cathedrals or feeding the poor, but a lot ends up somewhere else entirely: manor lands, wine cellars, and the private treasuries of abbots who live better than most nobles. Still, this system was rarely questioned. The tithe wasn't just a tax, it was a duty to God. Refuse to pay, and you weren't just dodging a bill, you were risking your soul. The church had spiritual leverage, which made their demands nearly impossible to resist in a world where people believed in purgatory, eternal judgment, and divine punishment. The power of a priest's words could carry more weight than a sheriff's sword. And beyond tithes, the church had land, so much land in some regions of England and France. The church owned nearly a third of all arable farmland. Monasteries managed huge estates, collected rents, ran mills and breweries, and maintained livestock herds. If you were a peasant tenant on church land, your rent didn't go to a lord, it went to the abbey. You might deliver your grain to a monk with ink-stained fingers who recorded your payment in a neat Latin ledger. But don't imagine the church as a uniform greedy monster. It was far more complicated in many villages. The local priest was poor himself, eating lentils and porridge, patching his robes, relying on handouts just like everyone else. He might serve as your doctor, teacher, scribe, and counselor all at once. He baptized your children, blessed your fields, buried your dead. He was part of your life, not above it, and his tiny share of your tithe might be all he had to live on. Meanwhile, monasteries, especially Benedictine or Cistercian ones, operated as mini economic ecosystems. They produced cheese, wool, honey, books, wine, and more. Some became export powerhouses, especially in fine wool. They used strict schedules, efficient labor systems, and often treated their workers better than secular lords. Their libraries preserved agricultural knowledge, and their gardens tested new growing techniques. If you worked for an abbey, you might have access to better tools, better pay, and more security than you would under a noble. Still, the church's economic power caused friction. Lay people resented the wealth they saw displayed in jeweled chalices, marble altars, and richly robed bishops, who arrived in gold-trimmed processions. And as trade expanded, merchants, especially in cities, began to question whether the church truly understood commerce. After all, official doctrine still forbade usury, the charging of interest on loans. That was considered a sin, but merchants needed credit, farmers needed loans to buy seed, artisans needed money to expand workshops. So what happened? They got creative. Lending didn't disappear, it just moved into gray zones. Instead of charging interest, lenders would frame it as a fee for late repayment, or they'd bundle loans with other services, or they'd set up partnerships where instead of lending money, a merchant invested in your wool stall for a cut of the profits. Technically not interest, just business. Everyone winked, everyone got paid. The church responded with sermons and warnings, but often turned a blind eye, especially when monasteries began doing the same. Some religious houses became credit hubs themselves, offering loans to farmers or smaller churches with repayment terms conveniently adjusted for holy reasons. The contradiction between theology and economics widened, but the machinery kept turning. Meanwhile, indulgences, payments in exchange for reduced time in purgatory, became another economic tool. Originally intended as acts of charity or pilgrimage, indulgences evolved into commodities. If you had enough coin, you could purchase spiritual leniency. Critics saw this as corruption. Reformers would later rage against it. But in the 13th and 14th centuries, it was just part of life. And beyond the money, there were the church courts, which could affect your finances in other ways. These courts handled matters of marriage, wills, contracts, and morality. If you were caught cheating your neighbor or reneging on a promise, you might find yourself summoned not by a knight, but by a canon lawyer. In a long robe, quoting scripture and Latin law, you'd pay a fine or maybe a penance. Either way, your purse would feel it. Still, the church's economic presence wasn't just about control. It was also about charity. Hospitals were often run by monks and nuns, almshouses, orphanages, and leper colonies, all depended on church donations and management. Pilgrims could sleep and eat for free at many monasteries. During famines, some abbeys opened their granaries. Yes, they took a lot, but sometimes they gave back. The church understood its public image mattered. A bishop known for generosity could inspire loyalty. One known for greed might inspire revolt. By the late Middle Ages, critics began to grow louder. Preachers like John Wycliffe in England and Jan Hus in Bohemia questioned the church's wealth. Peasant revolts often targeted church property first, not just out of rage, but because they knew that's where the food, tools, and coins were stored. A revolt without resources dies quickly, so they looted the granaries and cracked open the tithe barns. And yet the church remained. It adapted, reformed, dug in deeper. Because more than just an institution, it was woven into medieval life. Every field had been blessed. Every price had been prayed over. Every coin had passed beneath the cathedral bell. You could resent the tithe. You could question the wealth. But when your child was sick, when the rains wouldn't come, when the harvest failed, and the wolves howled too close, you still lit a candle. You still whispered a prayer. You still hoped. Because even in the complex, uneven world of medieval economics, faith was still currency. And everyone, rich or poor, needed something to believe in. Let's pause for a moment and imagine you're not a baker, not a merchant, not even a farmer today. You're something else entirely, a subject of a kingdom at war. The banners are raised, trumpets sound. Somewhere beyond the hills, an army is marching, maybe toward your town, maybe away from it. You don't wear armor. You don't own a sword. But make no mistake, you will pay for this war. In the Middle Ages, conflict wasn't just a backdrop to life. It was a powerful economic engine, a crisis, a tax burden, and an opportunity all at once. War could empty treasuries, collapse trade routes, ruin harvests, and scatter families. But it could also drive innovation, boost demand for goods, and create sudden fortunes. The trick was knowing which side of the battlefield you stood on. Let's start at the top. Kings and nobles fought for land, inheritance, honor, or sometimes just pride. But war, as it turns out, is expensive. Horses, armor, spears, ships, siege equipment, provisions for soldiers, payment for mercenaries. Adds up fast. So where does the money come from? From you. If you live in a kingdom preparing for war, expect new taxes. Sometimes it's a scudeja fee paid by landowners instead of sending actual knights. Sometimes it's a wool tax levied on England's most important export to fund campaigns in France. Or maybe a poll tax, like the infamous one that triggered the 1381 Peasants' Revolt. Whatever form it takes, war has a way of reaching into your pocket, even if you never see a battlefield. You might be a tenant farmer working your usual plot, but now part of your grain is seized for the army. Or your ox is taken for the supply cart, or your eldest son is conscripted by the local lord. You still have to sow and harvest. Still have to feed your younger children, but with fewer hands, fewer tools, and less grain. The war is somewhere else, but it's inside your house now too. If you're a merchant, war scrambles everything. Routes become dangerous. Roads are blocked, sea lanes fill. With pirates, insurance doesn't exist. You can lose your entire stock to bandit soldiers, or simply to chaos. On the flip side, if you can survive, the risk demand skyrockets. Soldiers need shoes, bread, ale, cloaks, rope, horseshoes, soap. If you can supply it and stay alive, you might get rich. The church, as usual, adapts. Popes declare crusades, rallying the faithful to take up the cross. But crusading costs coin, so indulgences are sold, tithes are increased, monasteries offer loans to noble families, mortgaging land to pay for armor and ships. It becomes a religious war and a financial one. Meanwhile, towns suffer or benefit, or both. If your town lies along a supply route, it might suddenly boom. Inns are full, forgeries ring with work. Ale flows, but if you're in the path of an army friendly or hostile, it's devastation. Soldiers take what they want. Payment, if offered, is often in promises or stolen coins. Fields are trampled, wells are poisoned, women flee markets close end. Fear becomes the new local currency. Now imagine, you're a peasant living under a lord who's off fighting. He left months ago and hasn't returned. In his absence, the local reeve is squeezing tenants harder. Rents go up, labor demands increase. Appeal to the steward, but he shrugs. War costs, he says. Eventually rumors trickle in: the lord is dead. His heir is a child. The estate goes into wardship, managed by another noble who cares even less about your survival. Your duties don't change, but now your future is murky. Do you stay and hope things improve, or flee to a freer town? Urban centers in times of prolonged war often swell with refugees. Displaced farmers, widows, and young men looking for work crowd the gates. City officials are torn. They need labor, but fear disease and unrest. Some towns pass laws limiting who can stay. Others seize the moment. More people means more taxes. But let's flip the coin. War also creates opportunity. If you're a blacksmith, this is your time. You forge swords, arrowheads, horseshoes, armor buckles. You charge double. You're booked solid. You might even hire extra help apprentices from broken homes, boys too young to fight. You feed them, teach them, and your workshop becomes one of the few places in town untouched by starvation. If you're a landowner, war may reduce the population, but your rents can remain fewer. Tenants means fewer mouths, yes, but also fewer complaints. You can consolidate land, raise livestock instead of grain, shift to wool, which requires less labor and brings higher profits. In the long run, you might come out stronger. There's another group profiting: the mercenaries, men without land or title, who sell their swords to the highest bidder. They drift from battlefield to battlefield, half warrior, half bandit. Some are noble-born second sons, others are commoners with nothing to lose. They fight, plunder, and when the war ends, they often keep looting anyway. No one wants them back home. War also affects coinage itself. To fund campaigns, kings sometimes debase the currency, mixing cheaper metals into silver coins to stretch the treasury. The coins look the same, but buy less. Merchants grow wary, bakers raise prices, laborers grumble, and in the corner of the market, a money changer shakes his head. Thin silver, he mutters. It's all thin silver these days. Eventually, the war ends. The last banners are lowered. Survivors limp home, some with plunder, many with nothing. Widows bury their dead. Orphans beg on street corners. Fields go untilled. The cost of peace is different, but just as heavy. Rebuilding begins slowly. Roads repaired, markets reopen. A new generation of children is born, but scars remain in the ledgers, in the land, in the town. People, some men return with trauma that has no name. Others return hardened, cruel, unable to rejoin the rhythms of peace. Crime rises, so does desperation, but people adapt. They always do. A new tithe is introduced to rebuild the kingdom. A new tax on salt, a new toll at the bridge. Life goes on. The war becomes a story passed from lips to ears, embroidered with pride or regret, depending on who tells it. And if you're lucky, years from now, he'll sit beside a fire and tell your grandchildren, "Yes, I lived through the Great War. No, I didn't fight, but I paid for it. We all did." Because in the Middle Ages, war wasn't just fought with swords. It was fought with grain, coin, labor taxes, and the quiet, endless sacrifices of people who never touched a battlefield. Let's come back home, not to a city or a battlefield, but to the familiar rhythms of a village, the slow looping patterns of planting and harvesting, baking and brewing, selling and swapping. Because while kings and merchants made the headlines of the medieval world, it was the village economy, small, repetitive, deeply local, that kept most people alive. And if you want to understand medieval economics at its most human scale, then you need to understand how a single village functioned, not just as a community, but as an economic organism. Picture it: early morning, the sky still gray with mist. You step outside your cottage, feet hitting hard-packed earth, chickens scatter, A dog trots past, tail wagging, and across the road smoke curls from a neighbor's thatch-roofed oven. She's baking bread, maybe not for herself, but for someone else, because not every villager bakes their own loaves. Why? Because the bread economy is more complex than it seems. Wheat is expensive. Most peasants can't afford to grow enough for daily use. Instead, they rely on rye barley or oats grains that are heartier, cheaper, and less refined. The rich eat white bread. You eat dark loaves, coarse and dense. But even if you have grain, baking at home isn't. Simple ovens are communal or controlled by the local lord. You might have to pay a fee or give up part of your dough to use the fire. That's where the village baker comes in. A skilled baker might operate a small oven year-round. Villagers bring flour, and for a cut either coin or a baker's dozen. Slice. The baker returns fresh loaves. Bread then is not just food, it's labor time service. A microeconomy built on fire, flour, and the mutual need to eat. Right next door might be the alewife, a woman brewing small ale in wooden barrels in her backyard. This isn't strong beer. It's low alcohol, fast fermenting, and meant to be drunk daily. It's safer than water. Children drink it, workers rely on it, and since it goes bad quickly, it's sold directly in cups or jugs. Alewives were among the few women regularly participating in economic life, independent, enterprising, and often scolded for overcharging or watering down their product. The local ale taster might stop by to check the quality. If it's too weak or the measure is short, fined, publicly shamed, maybe even forced to wear a special cap. Then there's the miller. If bread is central, flour is essential, and you can't mill grain by hand forever. The local mill perched on a stream is often owned by the lord and run by a tenant miller. You bring your grain, he mills it, but he keeps a portion as his fee, sometimes too much. Millers are notorious for skimming extra, adding water, or swapping good grain for bad. They're vital but rarely loved tales of dishonest millers are common in medieval folklore for a reason. Still, despite these tensions, the village economy mostly runs on trust and memory. There are few written contracts, no receipts. Instead, deals are made aloud in full view. Everyone knows everyone. If you cheat someone, word spreads. Reputation is your credit score, and gossip is the enforcement mechanism. Barter still rules here. You might trade a dozen eggs for a pair of sandals, or a week of plowing for a sack of oats. Coin exists, but rarely stays long. A few silver pennies might come from selling wool at the nearby town's market, but by the time you've paid rent, tithe, and mill fees, you're lucky to keep one. And if you ever need more coin to pay a fine, secure a marriage dowry, or buy salt, you might take a day's walk to a larger village or small town. There you'll find a more formal market, livestock for sale, spices from far-off places, bolts of cloth you'll never afford. You'll see people dressed better than you've ever dreamed, speaking faster, holding scales, counting coins. It's intimidating, but it's also your only access to the wider economy. You'll sell what you can: eggs, baskets, cheese, maybe a cured hide, and then just maybe you'll buy something rare. A small blade, a bit of sugar, a clay whistle for your child. The exchange is brief but meaningful. You return home poorer in coin, but richer in status. That whistle will be talked about for weeks. Back in the village, everything has its season. Spring is for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvesting, winter for mending and waiting. Each part of the year carries different needs and different economic pressures. If a pig dies in November, there's no replacement until spring. If your shoes wear out in March, you'd better hope the cobbler isn't snowed in. People plan carefully, often borrowing tools or storing seed. Some hoard salt and dried beans. Others trade favors instead of goods. I'll help you build your fence if you help me shear my sheep. It's not generosity, it's economic survival. And yes, even in these tight-knit communities, there are hierarchies. The reeve might have a better house, the priest a second set of boots. The widow down the road might owe debts she can't repay. Class exists here not in castles and crowns, but in roof quality, livestock size, and bread freshness. But there's resilience too. If your roof caves, and neighbors might help, not because they're saints, but because next year it might be them. Economic survival in the village is a collective act. You can't fence yourself off from hardship. You endure together or not at all. children learn young. A boy of 10 knows how to trap rabbits. A girl of 8 can bake flatbread. By adolescence, they're workers. Every hand counts. The family economy is the village economy, and if one part fails, a failed crop, a dead ox, it can ripple across the entire community. Still, there is joy. Feast days mean free bread from the manor ale for all gains in the field. A wedding becomes a moment of shared bounty meat, laughter, dancing. Even funerals bring a strange comfort. The village pauses, remembers, eats together. Food and grief intertwine, and life moves on. The village economy isn't measured in growth profits or stockpiles. It's measured in endurance. In how many people survive the winter, and how often the bread rises, and how few times you have to eat seed grain before spring. And that, in the end, is what medieval economics was really about. Not wealth, not ambition, just making it day by day, loaf by loaf, trade by trade, through a world that offered little safety, but endless interdependence. Let's stand still for a moment. Close your eyes and imagine someone handing you a small silver coin. It's a penny, worn smooth, barely bigger than your thumbnail. On one side, a crowned king. On the other, a simple cross. It's cold in your hand, heavy though it weighs just a few grams. But more than anything, it's a symbol of power, of trust, of time. Because in the Middle Ages, a coin wasn't just a means to pay. It was a tool that helped define reality. So how did money really work in a world where many people never saw a single coin for weeks at a time? To start, not all money was equal, and not all of it was metal. Sure, silver pennies were the most common form of official currency in many kingdoms, but their value fluctuated wildly. A penny minted under King Henry might not be accepted under King Edward unless it was restamped. Some were clipped or shaved down. Some were counterfeit, bad alloys, or foreign coins passed off in a pinch. To protect themselves, people began to carry scales, touchstones, and even trial coins to weigh and test silver on the spot. If you were a merchant, you might even bite the coin, not to check for gold, but simply to feel whether it was solid or filled with base metal. If it bent too easily, it wasn't good silver. But money wasn't limited to coins. In many rural villages, barter remained dominant. A chicken for 2 sacks of barley, a spindle of wool for a copper pot, a haircut for a loaf of bread. These exchanges didn't rely on fixed prices. They relied on custom and mutual need. Still, as trade expanded and towns grew, the need for standardization became unavoidable. And this is where things get interesting, because money in the Middle Ages was never just about coins. It was also about measurements, and those too were slippery. Let's say you're selling grain. The buyer asks for a bushel, but whose bushel? A London bushel, a York bushel, a local lord's bushel, carved from an old wooden keg. All could differ, slightly, sometimes on purpose. Merchants could rig weights, adjust measures, and shape containers to their advantage. A sack could be underfilled, a scale slightly tipped, a loaf of bread a little light, and in many towns disputes over weights and measures were as common as gossip about the weather. That's why towns began appointing officials, the aleward, the breadweigher, the grain measurer, to monitor fairness, and why punishments for cheating could be so public and theatrical. A baker caught shorting a loaf might be pilloried with stale bread around his neck. A merchant who used false weights could be dunked in a river or marched through town with his scales nailed to his chest. Fair trade wasn't just economics, it was morality. Meanwhile, on a broader level, entire kingdoms struggled with the issue of coinage reform. Kings had the exclusive right to mint coins called seigniorage, and often used this privilege to fund wars, build cathedrals, or bribe nobles. When the treasury ran low, they'd issue new coins slightly smaller or of lesser purity, but with the same face value. It was subtle inflation centuries before the word existed, but people noticed trust eroded. And suddenly foreign coins, Venetian ducats, Florentine, Florence Arab dinars, began circulating more widely, especially among merchants who traveled. These foreign coins were often more reliable, more pure, and more trusted than local mints. You could find a gold florin in a German merchant's pouch, a Byzantine coin in a London tavern, or a French livre in a Spanish fair. In essence, a medieval currency exchange system emerged based not on central banks, but on relationships and reputation. Money changers became vital. You'd go to them not just to swap coins, but to weigh them, test them, and learn the going rate. These men, and they were almost always men, were the financial engines of medieval commerce, and they often doubled as bankers, offering credit loans and written agreements. Which brings us to paper, yes, paper, or at least parchment, because even in a world of metal coins and heavy ledgers, the seeds of a modern financial system were growing. Let's say you're a wool merchant. You ship 10 bales to a partner in another city. You don't send coins with them. You send a letter of credit, signed, sealed, and verified by a trusted money changer. Your partner presents the letter. The local agent verifies it. The goods are paid for. No coin changed hands, but value moved. This is the birth of banking, and as this proto-banking system grew, so did a new obsession time. Why? Because money only means something if you can track when it's owed, when it's earned, when it's due. And so people began to mark, not just quantity but duration. Monasteries with their intricate schedules of prayer were among the first to track time, mechanically building early clocks. Towns followed suit, installing public clocks on towers, symbols not just of wealth, but of temporal power. A town with a clock could set schedules, regulate markets, and enforce curfews. Time became money long before the phrase was coined. For the average worker, this meant hour-based labor began to rise. Instead of being paid per task, you might now be paid for a set number of hours. Acres, builders, even scribes found themselves watching sundials, bells, or shadows. In cities, work was now measured, and with measurement came control. Of course, the shift wasn't universal. Most rural life still ticked by natural rhythms: sunrise, sunset, seasons, festivals. But in the growing towns, mechanical time and monetary time began to merge. Bells rang to open markets. Laws dictated how long a tavern could serve ale. Workers began tracking day wages. And slowly, a new kind of economy emerged: scheduled, measured, regulated. All of this coins, contracts. Clocks built the scaffolding of what we now call capitalism. But in the Middle Ages, it was still messy, fluid, built on shaky trust and local memory. People didn't yet live by budgets. They didn't track profit margins, but they did know the value of a good coin, the risk of bad silver, the weight of a loaf, and the hours it took to earn either one. And behind every transaction was something deeper, a memory of who was fair, who cheated, who lent in good faith, who lied, who forgave a debt when times were hard. Because in the end, medieval money wasn't just about metals or measurements. It was about relationships. Let's come back home, not to a city or a battlefield, but to the familiar rhythms of a village, the slow looping patterns of planting and harvesting, baking and brewing, selling and swapping. Because while kings and merchants made the headlines of the medieval world, it was the village economy, small, repetitive, deeply local, that kept most people alive. And if you want to understand medieval economics at its most human scale, then you need to understand how a single village functioned, not just as a community, but as an economic organism. Picture it: early morning, the sky still gray with mist. You step outside your cottage, feet hitting hard-packed earth, chickens scatter, a dog trots past, tail wagging, and across the road smoke curls from a neighbor's thatch-roofed oven. She's baking bread, maybe not for herself, but for someone else, because not every villager bakes their own loaves. Why? Because the bread economy is more complex than it seems. Wheat is expensive. Most peasants can't afford to grow enough for daily use. Instead, they rely on rye, barley, or oats, grains that are heartier, cheaper, and less refined. The rich eat white bread. You eat dark loaves, coarse and dense. But even if you have grain, baking at home isn't. Simple ovens are communal or controlled by the local lord. You might have to pay a fee or give up part of your dough to use the fire. That's where the village baker comes in. A skilled baker might operate a small oven year-round. Villagers bring flour, and for a cut, either coin or a baker's dozen. Slice. The baker returns fresh loaves. Bread then is not just food, it's labor, time, service. A microeconomy built on fire, flour, and the mutual need to eat. Right next door might be the alewife, a woman brewing small ale in wooden barrels in her backyard. This isn't strong beer. It's low alcohol, fast fermenting, and meant to be drunk daily. It's safer than water. Children drink it, workers rely on it, and since it goes bad quickly, it's sold directly in cups or jugs. Alewives were among the few women regularly participating in economic life, independent, enterprising, and often scolded for overcharging or watering down their product. The local ale taster might stop by to check the quality. If it's too weak or the measure is short, fined, publicly shamed, maybe even forced to wear a special cap. Then there's the miller. If bread is central, flour is essential, and you can't mill grain by hand forever. The local mill perched on a stream is often owned by the lord and run by a tenant miller. You bring your grain, he mills it, but he keeps a portion as his fee, sometimes too much. Millers are notorious for skimming extra, adding water, or swapping good grain for bad. They're vital, but rarely loved tales of dishonest millers are common in medieval folklore for a reason. Still, despite these tensions, the village economy mostly runs on trust and memory. There are few written contracts, no receipts. Instead, deals are made aloud in full view. Everyone knows everyone. If you cheat someone, word spreads. Reputation is your credit score, and gossip is the enforcement mechanism. Barter still rules here. You might trade a dozen eggs for a pair of sandals, or a week of plowing for a sack of oats. Coin exists, but rarely stays long. A few silver pennies might come from selling wool at the nearby town's market. But by the time you've paid rent, tithe, and mill fees, you're lucky to keep one. And if you ever need more coin to pay a fine, secure a marriage dowry, or buy salt, you might take a day's walk to a larger village or small town. There you'll find a more formal market, livestock for sale, spices from far-off places, bolts of cloth you'll never afford. You'll see people dressed better than you've ever dreamed, speaking faster, holding scales, counting coins. It's intimidating, but it's also your only access to the wider economy. You'll sell what you can: eggs, baskets, cheese, maybe a cured hide, and then just maybe you'll buy something rare. A small blade, a bit of sugar, a clay whistle for your child. The exchange is brief but meaningful. You return home poorer in coin, but richer in status. That whistle will be talked about for weeks. Back in the village, everything has its season. Spring is for planting, summer for tending, autumn for harvesting, winter for mending and waiting. Each part of the year carries different needs and different economic pressures. If a pig dies in November, there's no replacement until spring. If your shoes wear out in March, you'd better hope the cobbler isn't snowed in. People plan carefully, often borrowing tools or storing seed. Some hoard salt and dried beans. Others trade favors instead of goods. I'll help you build your fence if you help me shear my sheep. It's not generosity, it's economic survival. And yes, even in these tight-knit communities, there are hierarchies. The reeve might have a better house, the priest a second set of boots. The widow down the road might owe debts she can't repay. Class exists here not in castles and crowns, but in roof quality, livestock size, and bread freshness. But there's resilience too. If your roof caves in, neighbors might help, not because they're saints, but because next year it might be them. Economic survival in the village is a collective act. You can't fence yourself off from hardship. You endure together or not at all. Children learn young. A boy of 10 knows how to trap rabbits. A girl of 8 can bake flatbread. By adolescence, they're workers. Every hand counts. The family economy is the village economy, and if one part fails, a failed crop, a dead ox, it can ripple across the entire community. Still, there is joy. Feast days mean free bread from the manor ale for all games in the field. A wedding becomes a moment of shared bounty, meat, laughter, dancing. Even funerals bring a strange comfort. The village pauses, remembers, eats together. Food and grief intertwine, and life moves on. The village economy isn't measured in growth, profits, or stockpiles. It's measured in endurance, and how many people survive the winter, and how often the bread rises, and how few times you have to eat seed grain before spring. And that, in the end, is what medieval economics was really about. Not wealth, not ambition, just making it day by day, loaf by loaf, trade by trade, through a world that offered little safety but endless interdependence.